Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Lisa and this is Most Highly Guided. Thank you so much for all your views and any new subscribers. I really do appreciate each and every single one of you for listening to a nobody like me. It's always astounding to me, so it's got to be by the grace of God that you are all here, because really I'm just me. So we are going to do the next chapter of Beyond Death's Door so we can get this book finished up. I think there's only possibly about 3 chapters left. So we will try and get this one finished, and then I will go ahead as well and film a video for later on in the week. I've been really unwell, not with colds or flu or anything, just with my endometriosis. So I've been in incredible pain. And also my daughter's actually poorly up in bed. She's asleep. So I thought while she's asleep, I'll come on and try and film this week's videos. Make hay while the sun shines, says, as we say here in England. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do today, guys. So this next chapter is called Dealing with the Dead. If you want to see all the other videos from this book, then please go check out them on the channel. I actually really do need to get on and put them all into playlists. So all the books are in playlists of the video, so you can just go down the playlist and watch them if you so want to, rather than scroll through all the videos to try and find them. So that is something I need to do. But in the meantime, they are on there. Just scroll down and have a look, guys. So yes. Right, we shall go ahead and read this chapter. I've been looking out the window, keeping an eye. I've seen a bird fly down. I think it was a robin. And I have got some vegetables planted. And they like to dig them up. And because they're only small. But hey, if they want them, let them have them. I'll sow them again. Anyway, that's another video. Let's stay focused. We are doing Beyond Death's Door. Dealing with the Dead, Chapter 8. Contemplation of death for the purpose of our discussion involves a person who knows or is convinced he is dying. Sorry, guys. Usually dying from a dreaded disease. As it happens, he's the most neglected of our patients and perhaps the most lonely. He may be full of questions, but no one will listen or offer answers. Most terminally ill people intuitively know they are dying without being told. Thus, some marvellous theatrical performances take place in the hospital room, as visitor and patient each pretends the other doesn't know, and with very guarded conversation, each attempts to deceive the other. Dying patients need the close relationship and sympathy from someone who knows and can relate to them. The dying patient should no longer be the neglected patient. Physical death is a fact of life, but to allow physical death is a fact of life, but to allow spiritual death because of fear of discussing it would be a heartless folly. Most of us avoid the thought of dying. The very subject is disruptive. We often treat those who are terminally ill as if they have a social disease. We shut them up in hospitals and deprive them of all the pleasures that once made their lives full and meaningful. Children, friends, music, good food, home, love, and honest conversation. But soon it will be our turn to occupy that same bed, face that same calamity of life, and contemplate death. Suppose you were suddenly told by your doctor you had an incurable disease and did not have long to live. But what would be your reaction? Disbelief, disallowance, depression? Of the vast literature dealing with death, extensive case reports of the dying patient have been internationally accumulated and analysed by 2 psychologists, Dr. Carlis Osis and Dr. Orlando Haroldson. In their book, At the Hour of Death, Dr. Philip Swihart has added other cases in his book, The Edge of Death. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a psychiatrist, deserves special recognition as a pioneer in the study of a dying patient, and it is to her conclusions that we now turn. Sorry, guys. Long hair is great, but after a while. Right. 5-stage process. Having interviewed more than 200 patients, Kubler-Ross outlines in her book on death and dying a pattern of 5 progressive stages in the emotions of the average patient who is awaiting death: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. 1. Denial. Almost always the first emotional stage experienced by the dying patient is denial. To him, death is a catastrophic announcement of doom. The patient may withdraw into solitary terror of his imminent nothingness. This could not happen to me. The diagnosis is wrong. The x-rays were mixed up. There's been some error in diagnosis. To support this denial, the patient may see many doctors. Such denial serves as a buffer after unexpected news. It allows the patient time to compose himself and perhaps to employ other less radical defences. This does not mean, however, the patient will not later wish to talk about his impending death. Rather, he may be willing and relieved to converse with someone who is really interested. On the other hand, some patients may be the first to realise they are dying, even before the doctor is aware of it. They may want to talk about it but are unable to find listeners. In fact, nobody seems to want to talk about death. Perhaps it is a distasteful subject, or perhaps it represents a threat to one's own existence. A frightening change in America's cultural heritage seems to be occurring in regard to senior citizens. 2 million Americans die each year, and since more than 8 million Americans are now over 65, about 80% of these deaths occur in nursing homes or hospitals instead of in private homes, where the dying person can be with his family. Hence, the death event has been transferred from the home to the hospital and is being handled rather poorly by all concerned. We physicians had no formal training for the emotional care of the aging patient or the dying patient, only the sick patient. Furthermore, the hospital environment for the dying patient has become most efficient and therefore almost completely depersonalised. In the usual intensive care ward, for instance, the family is allowed access only for 5 minutes each hour while the patient spends the remaining time in the care of strangers. The sicker he is, the more mechanical gadgetry is involved, the more ill he becomes, the more injections he is given, the less personal contact he feels, and the stranger the environment seems, and he dies friendless and alone. Diseases of the young and middle-aged are prevented or cured, the number of living elderly grows. With the survival of the elderly, the frequency of malignancies and chronic diseases of aging are increasing. If present trends continue, economic problems will occur as the number of elderly becomes greater than the number of those who are physically able to support them. Even now, the tendency seems to be for the average family to divest itself from the care of their elderly dependents, transferring them instead to nursing homes or perhaps into the obscurity of some human junkyard. I remember one elderly patient who existed in a depressing atmosphere in a rather repugnant nursing home. A forgotten patient among other depraved souls, he was treated as a protoplasmic nonentity. One day he became acutely ill with pneumonia, was transferred to the nearest hospital where antibiotics, oxygen and intravenous medications were to no avail. Although medical treatment was good, he died. He had received no treatment of the emotions and no care for the soul. He was friendless, frightened, forgotten and alone. There was no opportunity for him to talk to anyone about finances, family, religion or health, and no one asked if he was prepared for life after death. Dialogue of this sort, of course, should take place in privacy, at the convenience of the patient and only with his approval. The conversation should be terminated when he shows no interest in the subject or resumes his previous denial. These subjects should be broached before his illness renders his faculty and mind unapproachable. If the interviewer remains available, even if the patient does not feel like talking on the first or second encounter, he may soon develop a feeling of confidence that the interviewer cares and really wants to know him. The patient usually wants to share his loneliness and frequently becomes open and candid and allows a meaningful relationship to develop. Anger. So, I said there's so many stages. Well, number 2 is anger. It's usually the second stage. This occurs after the patient has overcome the devastating blow of initial news, followed by the reaction, "It can't be me." Denial is replaced by anger, by feelings of envy, rage, resentment, and the question, "Why me?" or "How could a loving God do this?" The stage of anger, in contrast to the stage of denial, is very difficult to manage. Patients may think or say things like, "The doctors don't know anything. They don't even know how to take care of me." These patients are very demanding of the nurses and the aides and constantly wanting attention. Nothing suits them. One of my heart patients, a 68-year-old lady, developed this angry, critical attitude. She became very irritable to her food. To her, the food was bad. The service was terrible, and turning to me during one visit, she said, "Even you are getting so that you never do anything right." Short-tempered, she was critical of everyone, particularly her husband. He finally left her. Her stage of anger and resentment persisted in spite of her loneliness. Although her impending death with heart disease has since corrected, her bitterness has not. She seems mad at the world and mad at God. 3. Bargaining. Sometimes the third stage is a debatable issue among doctors who either agree or disagree with Kubler-Ross. The anger stage may be replaced by attempts at good behaviour, hoping to please or bargain with God, since anger didn't help. This stage seems to be brief. I recall one patient who promised to dedicate his life to God and donate his money and time to the church if only God would spare him. He was spared, but he soon forgot his promise. Oh dear. The bargaining stage reminds me of those sudden calamities where people who usually remember God only in cursing now call him fervently. Acutely injured patients either seem to call Mama or Jesus during the stage of bargaining. The patient eventually acknowledges God even if he never has before. 4. Depression is often the fourth stage. When the terminally ill patient can no longer deny his illness and predicament, his anger and rage are soon replaced by a sense of great loss. Although a sense of loss may be initiated by losing one's job, the effects of surgery or anxiety of leaving behind the good things of life, the most frightening loss he faces is that of himself. Loss of hope, when it occurs, represents the final decay of the person. Among Dr. Kubler-Ross's patients, both atheists and people of strong faith were able to accept death with more equanimity and less depression than those of lukewarm beliefs. The depression stage has taken different forms in my own patients. I recall, for example, a cancer patient so depressed that he would not speak to anyone, nurses, family or friends, except to nod head yes or no. In addition to his terminal illness, his depression was compounded because he felt responsible for someone else's death. Later, he discovered that the other patient's death was actually caused by illness, and he was then able to cope with his own death. He became inquisitive about life after death and soon began talking freely with his family. 5. Acceptance is to be considered the fifth stage. After depression and the thoughts of impending loss of fond friends and memories, he finally faces the end of his own life with a certain degree of acceptance and quiet expectation. However, there is still an attitude of withdrawal and apathy. Finally, they may develop a regard for the world as a worthless place, emphasizing the unpleasant things of this life. Although the patient may accept his impending death, the family may refuse to accept it. Family members may avoid discussing with him the things about which he wants to know most. Is death painful? Is there life after death? How do I prepare for it? How can I be sure? Contemplation and premonitions. Not many dying patients have died with the security of another life. For example, Leo Tolstoy, in writing The Death of Ivan Ilyich, gives a horrifying description of expression that was fixed upon a dead man's face while he lay in his coffin. The expression presented the final stage in tragedy of watching himself die. Almost identical stages during contemplation of death were previously recorded by Tolstoy, that subsequently enumerated by Kubler-Ross. Tolstoy's Ivan fell from a ladder and injured his side. The wound eventually initiated an undiagnosed illness, which slowly and painfully led to his death. The reality of impending death had the effect of forcing Ivan Ilyich to examine his life. He recalled some pleasurable moments of childhood and youth, but remembered his adulthood as ugly and senseless. Contemplating death, he saw that his life seemed inversely proportioned to the square of distance from death. 3 days of horrible screaming followed as he resisted death. Finally, he accepted his life as worthless and meaningless. Then there was peace instead of fear. There was a type of joy taking place in saving knowledge. This transformation seems curious, for there is no hint of an afterlife in the death of Ivan Ilyich. Life seemed to exist only for this world. The redeemed life of Ivan lasted for only a moment, since death was oblivion. Tolstoy apparently believed this was sufficient. Reality for Tolstoy was in the now, and this is also characteristic of Russian ideology today. One particular patient I recall had a premonition of death and wanted to talk about it with his family. He seemed to sense that tomorrow would be too late, and it was. Perhaps we should listen more closely to premonitions of a dying patient. For some uncanny reason, their premonitions are often accurate. We should also have less fear in talking more openly with the dying patient. If he wishes to talk about his illness, then he should accept the invitation and develop the conversation on the patient's terms and try to answer his questions. It's interesting that in more than 200 patients approached by Kubler-Ross, she mentions only 3 who refused to be interviewed. Other doctors also find that patients do indeed desire to talk about themselves, their condition, their prognosis, and even death itself. What I say. When a patient asks me about his chance of surviving a serious illness, I try never to remove all hope of emphasizing the certainty of death. I find it much more helpful to help the patient truthfully that he has a serious disease, which I am frank to call by name, which could kill him, that he should prepare himself in case it is fatal, and that he should have things settled with God, so either way he can't lose. Pray for a miracle, but be prepared for anything. As a Christian, I also ask him if he's sure he knows where he will spend eternity. If he isn't sure, I ask him if he would like to arrange things so he can be sure. I can honestly say I've never seen a dying atheist. I've talked to many ministers, however, who have indeed known dying patients who completely rejected religion of any kind, including Jesus Christ. I've been observing now both the clergy and doctors deal with the dying patient. It's interesting that neither of the professional groups seem at all eager to establish any meaningful relationships with the dying patient. My thesis keeps getting stronger. The dying patient is the most neglected of all patients, except for those with contagious illnesses. Both the minister and physician seem to have been inadequately trained in either seminary or medical school to deal with those who are dying. Death may be viewed as an unpleasant reminder of their own mortality. Family members usually feel uncomfortable around the dying patient. Death remains a socially unacceptable disorder, something to be shunned, avoided and denied. Confrontation is often postponed, hoping the threat will magically disappear. Except during the stage of denial when no one wants to talk about death. The patient wants knowledge, preparation and reassurance. If he does not have assurance, he wants it. If he already has it, he wants more. Although he may have rejected the good news before, now he's more interested. He may want to know how to rededicate his life. You are his doctor, or are you his friend? And you have an attentive audience. The dying patient is more likely to listen to you and me than a preacher. The patient recognizes us as members of Sinners Anonymous, ones with whom he can identify since we are sinners just as he is. He is interested in our beliefs. If we can believe the Bible, then he figures maybe so can he. On the other hand, many patients don't consider the pastor a sinner. No, he's a preacher, not a sinner. They may think, how can he understand my problems if we, you and I, people like the patient, believe that Jesus Christ is alive and well today, then the patient can believe this too. He wants to hear it from us, and yet this is the very person we have been avoiding. We doctors, after writing orders on the patient's chart and brief examination of the patient, conveniently appear to avoid the patient's questions concerning his chances of survival and what happens if he dies. Similarly, the minister may enter the room, open the Bible, read a verse or two, say a prayer, and then also conveniently disappear to avoid the unasked questions which need answers now more than ever they ever did before. If we rely on the average minister instead of ourselves to answer these questions, they may go unheeded. Suppose the clergy could especially train the lay people for this type of ministry, and the flock could learn to minister to the flock. The sinner to the sinner. One-on-one approach might afford a high yield of effectiveness in reassuring the dying patient. I remember a judge who developed a malignant lymphoma, a fatal disease that invades the blood-producing organs of the body. He knew the disease would act like leukemia and would eventually result in death. In discussing the details of his illness, he asked if his death would be painful. I told him no. I would be able to arrange medications in sufficient doses near the time of his death so he would be without pain. I assured him he would be unafraid, unaware and unconcerned. At times, the conversation turned to other matters. As with other dying patients, his judge displayed an eagerness to hear about biblical truths and he had previously discarded or conveniently disregarded. I was actually surprised when he says he wanted assurance of salvation. He wanted to commit his life, whether he lived or died, to Jesus Christ. He asked me to pray with him. I told him I wasn't a minister, but he wasn't concerned. He was overjoyed. My prayer didn't sound too good to me, and I was amazed that I did it because I was so new at all this myself. He soon developed an attitude of expectation and was no longer afraid to talk about his death. He was a tough old gentleman, a scholar and a sportsman. He was also independent, but now he had turned to Christ. No minister seemed to have had much influence on him, but he was open to a layman's witness. God could use even someone like me. Similarly, a newspaperman whom had been treating previously for heart disease developed cancer of the pancreas, a digestive organ in the abdomen. This cancer was both inoperable and incurable, and the patient knew it. I saw him daily on rounds in the hospital, but didn't mention or discuss his impending death. Then one day he asked me privately if I believed in God. What an opening. He was asking me what I believed. He was a learned man, versed in philosophy, and was still searching for the purpose of life and still ignorant of spiritual things. The discussion that followed was friendly, open, and comfortable for both of us. Discarded spiritual passages started to take on meaning with insights I'd never known before. He seemed to develop some sort of personal relationship with Jesus Christ. There wasn't enough literature to keep him occupied. A change in personality gradually occurred. Each day he became more considerate of the nurses, more loving to his family, and was always inquiring about the welfare of other people, never mentioning himself. "Did you have a nice day?" he would say. "Sit down and tell me about yourself," and it didn't matter who the person was. And in this fashion he died, counting on Christ and loving the devil out of others. An article by Hadley Reid recounts his love for his dying son. Philip was of college age and was dying with a spreading cancer. In his story, the conspiracy of silence that usually surrounds the sick room was gradually replaced with honesty and candour in discussing his illness. The groping, the hesitance, the avoidance of truth that usually plagued the relatives of friends of a dying patient were finally dispelled. Gradually, there was a tendency to speak freely, to express compassion and love, to offer understanding and share companionship during the lonely vigil of death. Mr. Reid tells how his own hearing difficulty caused him to write notes to his son. He requested his son to share everything with him, including his pain, his discomfort, and his fears. Mr. Reid wanted to be near. By mutual consent, they talked about death, about facing its reality, about where he would like to be buried, and about a special request Philip made. "Promise that you will not let them keep me alive for the sake of keeping me alive. I do not want to live without a functioning mind. I only want to live if I am aware that I am alive. If I can enjoy being alive, that is very important to me." His father said he understood and agreed and would want the same thing. After Philip's death, his father composed some verses to express his love for his son. "Where did you go? On your magic carpet, when you closed your eyes and left so quietly in sleep. I think I know." What an opportunity is ours to buy up every opportunity to introduce the dying to Jesus Christ and to be sure of him ourselves. Woody Allen, the comedian, has dwelt on this morbid preoccupation with death. When an interviewer commented that Allen had already obtained immortality through his achievement, Woody's reply was, "Who cares about achieving immortality through achievements? I'm interested in achieving immortality through not dying." Billy Graham, on the other hand, in his book entitled Angels, indicates that he actually looks forward with an anticipation to death. He expects to be with Jesus Christ and to see him face to face. He anticipates seeing family members and friends who have died previously. Some people are acutely afraid of death when they learn there is another life. But putting Christ first really does remove the fear of death. Contemplation of death while we're still in good health affords us an excellent utilisation of time and objectives during our short pilgrimage on earth. Our present life is not everlasting, and we stand as being accountable. Since there is no rationale for death without faith, it follows, excuse me guys, it follows that faithless contemplation of death represents no more than a destructive oblivion. But if these people are correct, who tell us they have seen a life after death, then we have been betting our lives on the wrong thing. It is not safe just to die. Wow. This book has been so sobering. It really has. It's been so sobering and thought-provoking. I mean, as a Christian, there's a book called Living Life Backwards. I haven't read it yet. I actually want to read it, but I've spoken to people who have read it. And it's kind of what you do as a Christian, is it? Like, when you leave this earth, you go on to eternity with the Lord Jesus Christ. And so you live your everyday life with that thought at the front of your mind. Like, what's that going to be? Obviously, the Bible tells us somewhat of what that's going to be like. And I think the thing that makes people scared of death, and I'm speaking from my own experience, is because I used to be terrified of it before I was saved. And I used to have crippling panic attacks and I'd cry and I'd be in mourning almost. Is just the not knowing what happens. And I think that's where the fear comes from. It comes from the unknown. And yet it's one thing, one destination that we all reach. You know, everybody that's on this earth right now will die. And it's where they go that matters. And this is also why I've done sorry guys, my throat. This is also why I'm doing the soul winning book, because it kind of goes along with the death book. You know, if you can give people reassurance of where they're going and be able to take away that fear that Satan has placed in them because it's unknown, because they aren't saved, because they don't know the Lord, then you're doing more than winning a soul. You know, you're taking away also one soul from Satan that he can't use for his good, you know, that he can't instill fear into, because the Bible tells us, for God does not give us the spirit of fear. So, you know, it's all of these things that tie in. And I used to actually work in care for most of my life has been working in care before I ran my business. And some of that was mental health. So people with schizophrenia and drug and alcohol problems alongside the mental health issues that they had. And I've also worked in elderly care. So I will go to their communities, their homes, support them in their homes. And on occasion, I've worked in care homes. Some of the things I seen was harrowing, and it's one of the reasons I actually left it, because it broke my soul. There was a man dying in there, and I will never forget him. He was in the room on the end of the corridor, and I was new. Obviously, I'd not been working there long. I think it's my actual first week. So I was just trying to gauge what was going on in the home. It was terrible. I had to actually report this home to the police, to the local authority, and to the inspectorate, which is called CQC here in England. And they was closed, and anyway, but I did what I had to do, because I couldn't watch these people be treated like they're nobody. And this man was dying, and they just shut the door on him. They just literally shut the door on him and left him. And I went in and I thought, well, he's still alive. He's not dead. So I went in and I says to him, you know, would you like a drink? And because his swallowing wasn't great, we used to have to thicken up his drink. And honestly, that man drank so much fluid. So they literally just stopped tending to him because he was dying. But yet he was still alive. You know, this is somebody's loved one. They might not be here, but, you know, I love him if no one else loves him. You know, nobody should be dying alone. Nobody should be dying in neglect. And, oh, gosh. And it's these things that, I'll try not to cry because I cry way too much on this channel, but it broke me, because people should not be treated like that. And this is one of the reasons I actually thank the good Lord that my granddad lived with us until he left this earth. And I don't believe in putting our loved ones in homes. I would rather have them where I can take care of them, or a member of my family. My mum's also done this kind of work as well. So it's just instilled in us that our loved ones are our responsibility when they get older. And I know that's not always practical in life, but we should do our utmost best to make sure that they get the best treatment if they're in a home. Look up what is going off in that home, any reports that have been made. Just turn up. Don't make an appointment to see the home, just turn up, and you will get the best gauge of what's happening. I think because I've worked in them and seen them so much, I just don't like them at all. I just don't like these places. And because I think that you've got to care to be working in that environment, and I just don't think that many do. And there's some that do a wonderful job and that they genuinely love the people they care for. I'm not slating everybody, but those people, those angels, to me, they're just few and far between, and it's so sad. So it's something definitely worth thinking about for yourself, for other people, and what can we do as Christians to make a difference to somebody's life. That's, even if it's just going to our local homes and spending time with them, talking to people, you know, just stuff like that. I mean, There's a home local to us, and there's 2 women in there that are going to be 100. And they've asked people on, so because these ladies said they're not expecting many cards, they asked people on social media if they would mind sending them a card. So my kids have made them a card, and we're going to go drop them in. But it's just, what can we do? What can we do as a Christian to help lead people to the Lord, help people know love if people don't know love? And I was actually watching a thing on Netflix last night called Love Rats, and it's just about women who have been ripped off. But there was one lady that got involved with a man from Sri Lanka, and she touched my heart because it's like she never knew love. She'd never been married, she's not had kids, and she's got friends, and yeah, that's love, but you know, it's different, isn't it, when you've got a husband or a wife? And she was just took for such a ride, and honestly, she, you know, just certain things and situations that just sit with you. And I pray to the Lord that, you know, there's somebody that comes along and shows her what love is, because to live a life where nobody's loved you and you've not had that, the kind of love that comes from a marriage or your child, it's just so sad in my eyes. But then I'm a mother and a wife, and I love that. So, but you know, it might not be for everyone, but in my opinion. So anyway, before I start waffling on and making this video way longer than it needs to be, it's so thought-provoking, and I really hope that through what I've said, the Lord speaks to you into your life about whatever it is that needs to be, and you take that on board and do something with it, whether it's for you, whether a family member's going through it, or whether we can just help a complete stranger. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate you. I really, really do. And welcome to the new subscriber. I do notice when my digits even go up 1, because I just thank the Lord every time, because, you know, I see that the Lord has brought you here, and I'm so humbled by that. So thank you so much, guys. I will see you all in the next video. Have a blessed week.